we're just seeing loads of people starting to join. So hello, and welcome. It's a pleasure to have you all. I can see loads of people starting to come through. So welcome and happy International Women's Day. Thank you so much for joining us on this wonderful day of celebration. And it's always, every time this time of the year comes around, I always get really excited because it's just a great time to reflect and to celebrate on all the incredible achievements that we have made as women. And yeah, it's a perfect opportunity for us to just take a moment and celebrate. So I can see some lovely comments coming through there. Hello, and everyone kind of saying hello and welcome. It's a pleasure to have you. So by way of introduction, I will kick it off with introducing myself. So I am Cynthia Davis, the co-founder and CEO of Diversifying.io. For those of you who have not come across us before or who don't know who Diversifying is, we are a pro-diversity career platform that works in making sure that organizations are inclusive as they can be, but also promoting equal access to opportunities for everyone. And I'm absolutely delighted to be your host today. And what a fantastic show we have for you. We've been absolutely privileged to have some of the best and inspirational people from all around the globe that will be joining us today and sharing some wonderful insights to celebrate International Women's Day. And for those of you who might not know what the theme is, this year, the theme is Break the Bias. And I was trying to work out how to do the Break the Bias hand bit, and I don't think I've quite mastered it, so I won't try. But the theme is Break the Bias. And for us at Diversifying, when we always look at this theme, it brings a lot of different thoughts to us because of the work that we do, which is to continuously challenge and break the bias on a daily basis. But for the theme for this year is Break the Bias, and we'll be exploring this further, but also taking more of an intersectional approach when we talk about bias. And what I would like to say before we kind of start is, this is really a safe space. We want all of us to kind of celebrate and come together and celebrate all women. And, what I'd love to do is everyone's views are valid and respected. And just to make sure that, we all listen, we learn, and we hear some fantastic insights from all around the globe. So without further ado, as I mentioned, we've got a fantastic lineup, and I don't want to delay the process. But just to set the tone for today, we've got a Q&A box, which I'm sure you can all see, which is a chat function. So we will be towards the end having a Q&A session. So you can drop any questions that you have for the panelists, and I'll make sure that we get the opportunity to ask questions, because I'm sure most of you will be itching to get some questions across to our panelists. So do make sure you pop them into the chat function, and we'll try and cover as many of those as possible. So the format for today is I will introduce our wonderful panelists one by one, just so that you get an understanding of who we have joining us today and find a little bit about them and what Break the Bias means to them and why this day in particular is really, really important. And then I'll ask all the panelists to come and join me later on the screen, where we'll have a much more in-depth conversation around the topic today, which is Break the Bias. So without further ado, I'm so excited about my first panelist. This is somebody that continues to inspire me, and somebody that I've been privileged to know for quite some time, and he's such an inspiration to me. So my first guest, who I would like to welcome onto the screen, is Joanne. Hello, Joanne.
Hi, Cynthia. Wow, what an intro. I mean, touched by your words there. Thank you.
Oh, not at all. And, for those that don't know Joanne and the amazing work that Joanne does, so just give you a little info. So Joanne is an inclusion and belonging specialist, and she's the founder and CEO of See Change Happen. And Joanne works with organizations to bring about culture change that enables and allows people to thrive. And clearly we share the same vision on equality and continues to challenge the status quo. But my question to you, Joanne, is just for the audience and people that might not know you, is just to introduce a little bit about you, but also what inspired you to start See Change Happen.
Yeah, that's a long question, which I'll try and compress. So I ran an IT business for best part 25 odd years. I had 2 co-directors. I got to a point where I turned over £3 million and 20 or 30 odd staff. And then I got to a point where I realized that I was past my sell-by date. There was a lot of things in my life that weren't quite going as I wanted. I was becoming frustrated with my business partners. I got frustrated with being in IT support. It was just, having done it for most of my career, it became frustrating. And at the same time, my gender identity became more important for me to address. And the words I described is it became necessary for me to gender transition. And that was around 5 or 6 years ago. I was, in a way, I was fortunate. My business partners offered to buy me out because I believe that they had their own biases at the time, and my transition would not have been compatible with that small business, with my partners. I knew about their hidden thoughts about trans people. So I started, I woke up in the 1st of March 2017 going, wow, got a lot of money, but I'm not sure what to do next. And it was kind of that moment that took about 3 months to decide. But my passion at that time was if I could impact the world in a way where other trans people had a more positive experience of transitioning, of being them in employment, whatever that may be, to try and break some of that stigma. That was kind of my mission. And that's, I also took part of a Channel 4 documentary at the time, and that was our vision for that. The outcome was, if anyone watching that documentary, if we were able to change their lives for the better as a result of it, that was my wife and I's outcome from that. So that was kind of my initial passion. And then I think once I got into it, once I started understanding, I was an IT business owner. I was not an HR professional. I was not in this space before. I think once I started discovering and listening to people's stories, listening to everybody's stories, not just mine, not just trans people, I realized that my mission was more than just helping trans people. Yeah. It was around helping marginalized groups, communities, underrepresented people have a voice, amplify, spotlight, and help people speak out, and then break down, as we're doing today, we're breaking the biases. And so I think whether I pivoted or morphed, whatever word you want to use, throughout 2018, 2019. And I now see myself as an inclusion and belonging specialist, working with people in talent acquisition, working with HR teams, working with OD and L&D teams to try and create, well, I call it turning on lights. I'm not there to give answers. In fact, I'll probably give you more questions than I give answers. And what I want to do is I want to challenge you to start thinking for yourself, understanding your own why of D&I, understanding why it matters to you as a person and to you as a business. And that's kind of my passion now. And that's how I've kind of evolved. And somehow over that 5-year period, people start inviting me onto the stage to speak like this. So I must have done something right over this 5 years.
No, you certainly have. And, you talked around your documentary, which you did, which was inspiring, by the way. And for anyone who hasn't seen that, I'm sure that they'll be able to access that on public kind of channels. But it really was, for me, when I watched it, when you talk around just that understanding of differences, just really shown through for me. And question I'd love to ask is, why breaking down gender bias is important to you. And I think you alluded a little bit to that, but would just be really good to kind of delve a little bit into that.
Yeah, I mean, we as a species are programmed with biases. We all know that. It's not unconscious bias 101 session. But the output and the outcome of biases is problematic assumptions, problematic behaviors. It's denying people opportunity. So by breaking the bias, we're trying to re-educate people to think about their thoughts, their words, their deeds, how the impact of what they do has on people, how we're denying great people, opportunities to succeed and thrive in the world. So I'd say that the key thing about breaking the bias, or break the bias, is to make people become more aware of their biases, of their impact, and their inadvertent, if you like, propagation of discrimination, microaggressions, and denial of opportunities. So that's kind of, I see, what is break the bias. And what I suppose, if you think about vision, as women and marginalized people, and we are a marginalized, underrepresented group, intersectionally so as well. How are we going to move change forward? If we think about, I think there's a World Economic Forum did a report a while back, and they were saying that at the current rate of change, women won't achieve gender equity or gender parity in the Western world for another 50 years. That's 2072, if you're a bit slow on the maths there. And I say, well, hang on, at 2072, 50 years. Yeah. And wouldn't it be great if we could half that? And you think, well, actually, half of that is 25 years. That's 2047. That's not good either. Yeah. So we want to halve that again. And that's still 12 and a half years time. So we need to up the rate of change. We need to bring it into the attention. We need to make sure that we involve people as allies. And I often say that one of the things that occurred 100 or so years ago was men allowed women to vote. And that sounds really crass. Men allowed women to vote. We don't want permission to be able to vote, but that was the reality. Yeah. We had to have the people with power, people with privilege, people with the incumbent authority to vote, to allow us to vote. And I think that's the challenge we need. We need to involve allies to open the door. We can't keep banging on the castle walls expecting to be let in. We need to start dialogue. We need to get communication. We need to start education. Because as women, we can spend all day in our echo chamber telling each other how we should be improving the world, but we need to have our allies to open those doors for us.
And you're so right. I think the power of allyship is so sometimes underrated, but it's so needed for that progress to come forward and for us to start seeing that change that we desperately need. And Joanne, you know, I could talk to you all day about this. It's such a fascinating, topic, and I can't wait to delve deeper in our Q&A session. But I'd love to introduce one of our next panelists as well, and love to continue this. In the Q&A session. So Joanne, for now, thank you so much for that introduction. And wow, now I think the world can see why you're inspiring to me and why, having people like you as advocates for change is so important. So thank you. Brilliant. So moving on, and as I said, this is a global event, so we're jet setting all over the world today, and we're now moving from the UK and going all the way to India, where we have the amazing Arty. Arty, hello and welcome.
Hi Cynthia, thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure, and thank you so much for spending today with us and helping us to celebrate International Women's Day. So for those that might not know Arty, and I'll just give a brief introduction. So Arty is a scientist and somebody who's very passionate about social justice, and she's also currently an associate professor of electrical engineering at the University of Technology in Sydney, I presume, and also associate with the inclusive group. But Arty's work is also involved around inclusion, equity projects, both internationally for tech bodies, universities, schools, and charities. Arty, I don't know where you find the time to do all that. That sounds like a lot of things. But I'd just love to start off with just, asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself, but also how you combine your passions for science and research along with being an ED&I kind of advocate.
Sure, thank you so much, Cynthia. Well, just a little bit about myself in the sense, as you said in my introduction, I'm a scientist. And while I was doing my postdoc and working as faculty at City University of London, I was doing a lot of work on equity and diversity, and I was told that I had to choose between being a serious scientist and doing all this D&I work, and that the two couldn't go hand in hand. And I thought absolute nonsense. So you can't choose between these two things, and I certainly couldn't, so I continued doing both of them. And it's really important to have diversity and inclusion in STEM. It's absolutely critical. Otherwise, we won't have the technologies and services that we need to be inclusive towards all groups of people. Yeah. So, combining my passion for STEM, for diversity and inclusion and intersectionality. So as you've mentioned, I've done work for international bodies. Part of that was to say that when we have international bodies of professional engineers and so on, engineering is quite often a very male-dominated profession. Yeah. And it's defined not just as a male profession, it's defined as a white male profession. So all of a sudden, there's a certain image and there's a certain way of behavior that's going on. And it means that the advancement of people, even within professional bodies and the services they receive, are quite biased towards a certain group of people. And it's systemic. So you have to tackle it and you have to change it. So some of the work I've done with the Optical Society of America, with the IEEE, is to dismantle the systemic biases and to look at advancing minority groups, whether they're disabled people, whether they're minority race groups, whether they're trans people, LGBT people, and so on. And intersectionality comes into this in a big way, because if we define race and say someone's a race minority, what is a race minority in India? I might be a race minority in Britain, but I'm not a race minority in India. Yeah. And someone who's a race minority in the United States may not be a race minority elsewhere, or in the Caribbean and so on. So these terms are very difficult, especially in an international global context. Yeah. And STEM is an international and global workforce, really. So how do you define these things? How do you solve these problems? Because these problems are connected to the future of humanity, because tech is everywhere. Yeah. So we do it now, we're going to sow the seeds for a very, very inequitable future. So that's where the question comes in.
Wow, it's amazing. And I loved what you talked about there around intersectionality, because again, that is something that we sometimes forget when we talk about women, that our experiences of biases, again, are very different, you know, and intersectionality plays a big part in that. But also I loved what you talked around, that tackling systemic kind of barriers, because I think there's a lot that we could really delve in around how we do that, you know, whether that's on an organizational basis. You know, we've seen organizations coming forward saying they want to tackle that, but what do we really, you know, what does that actually mean? What's the tangible kind of actions that organizations can take around dismantling some of that? And I'd love to dig deeper into that. But just a question for you, really, around why breaking down gender bias is important to you.
Well, you know, I grew up as a child wanting to be a scientist, and I'd heard of Einstein and I'd heard of Richard Feynman and so on. And I thought, well, hang on a minute, where's a woman? Apart from Marie Curie, I didn't know of any other female scientist, and certainly not of any Indian female scientist. Yeah. I thought there's no role model here. Yeah. So it's really important to break down those biases and create role models, create inspiration for young people, and to say you can be whoever you want to be, and give them really good examples so that they can achieve their potential.
Yeah, I totally agree. And representation's everything, right? You can't be what you can't see. So I think that is amazing. And, you know, thank you so much for those points, Arty. And I look forward to diving a bit deeper in our Q&A session. But for now, thank you so much. And I'm going to be jet setting back to the UK. And I think I've got the wonderful Toby that we're going to now. See, my plane is flying very fast all over the world now. So back to the UK. Toby, welcome.
Hi, Cynthia. Hi, good to see you.
Pleasure to have you. And
thank you.
For those that might not know Toby, a little intro. So Toby is a diversity inclusion architect and founder of Milden, which is a consultancy and advisory business. Prior to setting up his business, Toby worked as an in-house diversity and inclusion manager at the BBC and Deloitte. And Toby's also the author of a fantastic inclusive growth, which is really providing practical framework for business leaders to implement diversity inclusion in their organization. So seriously, a pleasure and a privilege to have you today. And thank you so much for your time, Toby.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. So my question to you, Toby, I'd just love to find out a bit more about you and the work that you do, but also just talking around the impact that bias has within organization, how we can build a much more inclusive culture.
Yeah, the reason why I wrote the book was because I wanted organizations to think about diversity and inclusion a lot more systemically, which we've already mentioned on today's call. Quite often, organizations try to fix individuals rather than fix the culture of the organization or the systems and processes. So from my experience of working in large organizations like the BBC and Deloitte before setting up my own company, I basically brainstormed all the things that I thought organizations were doing wrong in terms of really implementing diversity and inclusion in a sustainable way. And I came up with kind of 7 sustainable best practices. And that really was the kind of the the basis of the book. One of those is around colleague experience and design. And I kind of pinched a lot from what I learned at the BBC when I worked in user experience and design before getting into diversity and inclusion. And that was really about creating inclusive employee journeys and employee experiences rather than trying to fix the individual. Loads of organizations, obviously, when they look at the top of their organization, they have a gender imbalance, and they kind of jump to solutions. And one of the first things that they often do is design a career development program to get women to the top of the organization. And they'll put on events to try and boost confidence and improve networking skills and pitching skills and negotiation skills and things like that. The women that I've worked with, they feel that those areas don't need development. It's the culture of the organization that needs addressing. And things like the lack of agile or flexible working, which gets in people's way. Not just women in the workplace, but it could be people who have disabilities or long-term health conditions that need more flexibility in the workplace in order to progress and thrive.
I love that. And I loved what you said around, the organization are always trying to fix the individuals as opposed to fixing the organization. And it's so true, right? Because sometimes that seems like almost the easier solution for them. So, and it's really interesting what you kind of say. And I think that culture piece that you talked about as well, I think is really, really important, because it's, sometimes without that right culture being there, where people have that sense of belonging and that kind of empowerment, it's an environment where they can't succeed, where they can't thrive. So it's really, really important to kind of get that right. And one of the things I wanted to ask as well, a similar question to what I've asked all the panelists, is why it's really important to break down gender biases and why that's important to you.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's the right thing to do. I think, as human beings, we need to create a world that's, fair and equal. Yeah. But what I talk to my clients about is really the opportunity cost. If their business is not reflecting their community, their society, or their customers at all levels of the organization, what are they missing out on? Yeah. Are they missing out on better decision making, creativity, innovation, empathy with customers, designing new products and services that better serve their client base? And that's what I try to help my clients figure out. And going back to Joanne's point, really connecting with the why. One of my favorite books is by Simon Sinek, Starting with Why. Yeah. And that's where we need to begin. Really connect with the why, and then we can figure out the how and the what. But if we don't connect with the why, then it's just not going to land in organizations.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that's a great book, by the way. If anyone hasn't read that, it's a fantastic read.
Not as good as my book, mind you.
Of course, Toby, your book's so much better. So yeah, anyone who's not read Toby's book, go out and and hopefully we can put a link to your book in the chat for anybody that's really interested in that, and how it's not only helping leaders and organizations, but individuals as well, just to be clear about the part that they can play and the impact that they can have in organizations too. So yeah. Which is fantastic. So thank you so much for that, Toby, and look forward to having further discussions with you in the Q&A session.
You're welcome.
So right, I'm going to get on my jet set plane and flying all the way to the USA, where we have the wonderful Lydia joining us. Lydia, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everybody.
And you join us from lovely sunny Miami, I'm hoping. Please tell me it's sunny in Miami.
It is sunny. It's very nice. I don't have any lights. It's just all sunlight shining in here.
Oh, wonderful. Well, it's a pleasure to have you. So it's a quick intro to Lydia. So Lydia is a psychotherapist and addiction professional who is dedicated to supporting families from diverse backgrounds to learn healthier ways of interacting with their loved ones struggling with addiction. Wow. I mean, what an incredible thing to do, and I would love to find out a little bit more about how you do that and a little bit more about your world.
So hi everybody. I think before I get started, I just want to say that for me, I come from a line of amazingly strong women, both on maternal and paternal side, so I have to say that. And I grew up on the small island of Anguilla. I was born on the beautiful island of St. Kitts, and I believe I have some representative on here somewhere. But I started my journey in mental health. I worked in a residential treatment center for several years with young men. And again, my path is still evolving. And I heard Joanne and Arty both just kind of describe the evolving process of where they are and where they've come from in their journey. And more recently, I worked at a comprehensive addiction treatment center where we help families really to understand what are some of the barriers that are holding you back from setting some healthy boundaries with a loved one who might be struggling with addiction, where some of those boundaries might be necessary in order to support a healthy recovery moving forward. So I did that for several years, and during the pandemic, another transition happened in my life, and I started my own private practice. So I opened it up, and I want to make sure that I have the opportunity to work with as many people from different backgrounds. And as I've been doing that, I think what's been coming to me has been a lot more women. It's been a lot of women coming, reaching out for help, trying to, I think understand themselves, figure out themselves, and to gain some empowerment. And I know Joanne mentioned the word awareness. Yeah. Toby mentioned the word systems. So that is a lot of the work that I do. I take a look at the system, right? Because I do believe in looking at the family system, right? Not necessarily just zoning on the individual, but we have to look at the systems that impact us, which then definitely impact how we function in a larger organization. So that is a lot of the work that I do. And I want women and men, for those men that do come to me also, but I have mostly women, to be empowered, right? To start creating our own narrative, right? I don't want my life to be dictated by something that happened 200 years ago. I don't want my path and I want to be a good role model to my beautiful 12-year-old daughter who's watching every move that I make. So I want to be able to set that foundation for her so she can have a better future also.
And I'm sure your daughter's very proud of you, and happy International Women's Day to her too. And it's quite interesting what you talk about, because I think in the field that you're in, especially around mental health, I'd be really interested to find out, how do you break the bias within this particular field? Because again, as you said, around certain kind of communities, we're just really interesting around how you do that.
So I think a lot of the work really starts, with that individual understanding why do I show up the way I show up, whether in my relationships, what has influenced or impacted my perspective, what has influenced or impacted the way I allow people to treat me, right? Because when we join an organization, sometimes we fit in, right? Sometimes we fit in, and listening to Toby and Arty and Joanne, sometimes you don't fit in, and you have to break through some of those barriers to allow yourself to kind of grow in the direction that you need to grow. So I help those women try to understand and figure out those aspects, the insecurities, understand some of those things that might often not allow us to really be our true self, the self-doubt, right? Yeah. Understand the messages that we've gotten. And sometimes those messages comes in from our own family of origin, right? And those messages, again, are passed down and passed down and passed down. And we internalize those, and then we go out into the world, and that's how we function. So on a very core level, I want people to understand, let's start with you understanding you first, right? And then how you fit into those systems. So I believe if we gain some insight into that, it does give you an opportunity to kind of break through systemically some of the other things that might be, the situations you might be forced with, the organizations that you might eventually have to work with, and that might not fit with your narrative of who you truly are.
Yeah, I love that. Understanding you first. That is really, really powerful, isn't it? Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that, Lydia. And I know we're meant to have another panelist from Zimbabwe joining us, Rita. So unfortunately, Rita was having technical difficulties earlier, so I'm not sure she's been able to join. And I've just been informed by Steph on there that she's still not online. So what I'd love to do now is maybe invite all the panelists back and just have the opportunity to just delve into some of the topics that we've been talking about. And I think for me, one of the key things that seems to be coming out of this is around that that intersectional kind of approach. And I think that that is really, really important. And I'd love to ask, why taking that intersectional approach around breaking gender bias is so important. I don't know who would love to answer that.
I can have a go.
Go for it, Toby.
I just think it's important to recognize that we don't all fit neatly into one or two boxes, and that we have multiple identities and lived experiences that all come together. And I think, I suppose, what I often talk to my clients about is that they kind of approach diversity and inclusion with this very kind of siloed mentality, or kind of hierarchical as well. So they might say, okay, well, we're going to have a focus on gender, and it might actually be gender balance at leadership or within a particular part of the business, like in tech or engineering, where there might be a significant gender imbalance. And then, next quarter, we're going to do ethnicity and race. And the quarter after that, it will be mindfulness. And it's not a very efficient way of creating more inclusion in the organization. And we don't really get economy of scale either. So if you're, if an organization is developing a career development program for, say, women, and then another one for somebody of an ethnic minority background, if you're a Black woman, which program do you go on? Surely we should just have one really good career development program that is inclusive, and removes any barriers that might prevent somebody from getting onto that program or performing on that program once they're in it.
Yeah, great points there, Arty, and I can sorry, Toby, and I can definitely see Arty and Joanne have both got their hands up. So Joanne, you're closest to my screen, so I'll go to you first, because I'd love to get your thoughts on this as well, to follow on from what Toby's just said. Oh, Joanne, I think you're on mute.
I am, yes. I was being a good panelist and turning my mic off. It has to be one, every webinar, there has to be one of the panelists on mute. Anyway, following from what Toby was saying, I think we have to recognise the layering of intersectionality when we think about the multiple characteristics, different systems of oppression that layer onto people's identities. And we have to recognise that the lived experience of a white woman is different to the lived experience of a Black woman, or a white woman with a disability, or a white queer woman. So by ignoring the intersectional layers of someone's identity, what we do is we miss some of the systems of oppression, some of the struggles those people face in order to succeed. So bias attacks people differently depending on their multiple characteristics. I think by ignoring those intersections, we miss some of the nuances and those layers of discrimination, because what we don't want to do is create systems that benefit white women only, white straight women only. We want to make sure that we are understanding those true lived experiences.
Yeah, and I love what you say around layering. That is so true, and I think it's one of the things that we're always trying to educate organizations around, that different lived experiences, because it's not, to going back to Toby's point, it's not one size fits all into one particular box. Those different layers, you almost have to give them their own air and space as well, and understand the different experiences and challenges within that, which is a fantastic point. Thank you for that, Joanne. Arty, I think you had your hand up. Did you want to add anything to that point?
Yeah, sure, thank you. And I really liked what Toby and Joanne both said, so I agree with what you've said. And I just add and say intersectionality leads to not an additive sum of barriers for people or discrimination. It's more than sum. So if you've got two characteristics that are regarded in technical speak as minority characteristics, it's not discrimination for one plus discrimination for the other. It's more than that. And it can change based on the situation that the person is in. And problems with diversity programs and DEI programs is that it ends up being a hierarchy. So it ends up benefiting one group over another group. An example, Athena Swan programs that universities in the UK have run, and they've benefited white women substantially more than they've benefited women of color or Muslim women or disabled women. And it's recognized now, and they're trying to rectify it, But because there wasn't enough emphasis on understanding and really implementing intersectionality, it's led to this furthering inequity, even amongst women. So you start creating this artificial, or reinforcing, I should say, reinforcing inequity and systemic hierarchy, which we're trying to break down.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's so spot on. And one of the things I think, I'm not sure if it was Joanne that mentioned earlier around the difference that it would make, if we were to get all these things right now, we would only achieve that, almost in 50 years, I think you said, Joanne. And, for me, it's, how would people's lives look different if we were further along in the fight for gender equality? And if we were looking in that 50 years that you mentioned, what would that look like? What would we be measuring ourselves to have achieved by that point? I'm not sure who would love to tackle this question.
I mean, I'll give it a shot. And I think because I believe in, that individuality in terms of how we position ourselves in our relationships, how we position ourselves on the job, I think it will definitely look different if we start, because we'll have the ability then to create our own narrative. And that is something, my narrative and the narratives of others, if we can break through some of that, it would not look the way we think other people expect it to look. It would be driven by how my own thoughts, my own feelings, who I am as an individual, culturally, religiously, and all of the other, sexually, all of those other factors that really define who I am. I think it will really give us an opportunity to have, to have our own narrative and to not fit in that box. I think, Joanne, you mentioned something about a box, to the effect of fitting in the box. Maybe it might have been Toby. You don't have to fit into a box that, has been, as I said, I keep referencing 200 years ago, a box that was built, formatted, 200, 250 years ago, or even 10 years ago, right? Because things are evolving and people are evolving and changing. So I think it will really give us a chance to be true to ourselves. And that is one of the models that I encourage the women and the other individuals that I work with. You have to be true to you. And when you're not true to you, then you find yourself emotionally struggling to fit in. And then you have a lot of, whether mental health, psychological issues, a lot of those things, tend to then take a toll on how you function on a day-to-day.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Lydia. And you're so right. And it's that advancement of that as well. And I think as much as, you said, as women, we've got to do that. I think, men also play a big part in this. And I think we talked earlier around allies. And I think for me, it's not just women's responsibility to be calling some of this out. We know what the issues are. Yes, we can continue to talk about it, but, be interesting. What can, we've obviously got a lot of men who've joined this conversation, who want to learn, who want to know, as an ally, what can I do? How can I help? How can I, help advance some of this forward? So it's not 50 years, as Joanne said. Let's try and aim for half of that if we can. What's the part that men can play in that conversation to help break that bias? I don't know who would love to give us some insight.
So I can share very quickly before anybody else want to give their thoughts on it. When I work with couples, that is one of the things that I do. We really talk about some of those gender roles and those expectations that the men might have of the woman in the relationship, because then it tends to create, it creates conflict, it creates a lot of tension. So I do the same thing with the men, help them gain an understanding of their systems and the experiences from family of origin that might have impacted how they view women and how they view the role of a woman in the relationship, but then also how they view the role of the women in the workplaces, because I work with a lot of professional men. So that is one of the things I help to educate men as well, when they're coming in those couple sessions. And I really don't hold any punches with pointing things out and saying it as I see it in those relationships when I see that there's an imbalance somewhere. So that is my perspective from, the mental health part of it. And I'm sure the other panelists might have some greater insight on their end as well.
Yeah, there's a number of things that I think can be done. So first of all, I think we need to work on ourselves and our own inclusive leadership effectiveness. When I say leader, you don't have to be the chief executive or a senior manager overseeing a huge department. You can lead another person, and you can lead yourself inclusively. So if you want a useful framework, then it's worth just Googling Deloitte's 6 signature traits of being an inclusive leader, and look through those kind of 6 traits, and then just ask yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 for each of the 6, how well am I doing? And then, what could I do to improve? I think another key thing is to really act as a sponsor. So, there's mentoring and there's sponsorship, and I think we need to kind of go beyond mentoring and acting as a sponsor. And as men, I think we also need to just call out inequalities when we see it. So, if you notice somebody being talked over in meetings, or their ideas, that credit for their idea is taken by somebody else, or you notice that, the only woman in the meeting often gets asked to take the notes or pour the coffee, call it out. In a way that is comfortable for you and your personal style, but call it out and try and reduce those inequalities.
No, you're spot on that calling out some of those behaviors. I think that helps for sometimes people to be aware of that, that there is that bias coming into it, and how you start to break some of that, because the more we just ignore it and think, well, that's just how that person is, the more it goes untackled. So it's really about calling out and not being afraid, but also explaining why you're calling out, and that education, I think we talked about it, is also quite important when we are calling things out. And
Cynthia, I learned something. I on my podcast, I interviewed a really great guy recently. This is going to sound awful, but I forgot his name. Dr. Steve. I'll have to look him up. Anyway, he does a lot around inclusive leadership, specializing in LGBT leaders and inclusive leadership. And one thing I learned from him was that he said that you can call stuff out with kind of like these non-verbal cues. So if somebody does something in a meeting, you could do something like "ouch" or "ooh," it's like, but what it does is it just breaks the pattern of what's going on, and then you can delve a bit deeper. But I thought I'd share that with you. I'll try and dig out his episode, and I'll put it in the chat.
I think somebody's put Dr. Stephen. Is it
Yacovelli? Yeah,
that's it. So we've got somebody else there. And Joanne, I can see your hand is up on that point as well.
Yeah, in the lead up to today, I've been looking for articles, and I found a very interesting one in HBR magazine the other day, which I found quite insightful and sort of crystallized a few thoughts for me. And it's around, the title is "Male Allyship is About Paying Attention." And it introduced the concept to me of GQ, gender intelligence. So we talk about cultural intelligence, but it's about creating gender intelligence in men, in women, in people who identify maybe as non-binary, so that people become aware of their own footprint, they become aware of what's going on around them. Because as a white person, I'm not necessarily always aware of the impact for Black and brown or Asian people, because I don't breathe that same experience every day in, day out. I learned as an able-bodied person by spending time with people like Toby. I got a friend called Essie, and I travelled to London with them. So I suddenly understood my able-bodied privilege, my ability to walk. So what we're often not seeing is we're not allowing men to experience what we experience. So I think by creating this concept of gender intelligence, we're allowing men to start to understand, rather than be defensive about it, rather than backing off and saying, oh, it's all too difficult, oh, I don't want to talk about that, and it's threatening their masculinity. It's allowing them to truly experience the lived experience we have. And I don't know if there's a great book, I don't know if I got it on my shelf, but I'll put a link in the chat in a minute, around it's the lived experience of women just talking through their stories. I think I listened to it on Audible. And by listening to that for 3 or 4 hours, it really drummed home to me the challenges women face and the repetitive stories and the things we hear all the time. And when we talk about not all men, but yes, all women have those stories. It's really, really important to amplify those and allow men to maybe in safe spaces where they feel comfortable to talk about it, truly start to understand the challenges that women face, the intersectional challenges that people face, and how they can transform the way they act, behave, and call themselves out, call each other out. And it shouldn't be all about women having to say stop, no, enough, or pardon, or whatever it is. Men should be calling themselves out in those situations as well. I think that evolution of learning, that evolution of understanding is key to that journey, I believe.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. That evolution of learning, I totally agree. And I can just see we've been joined by Rita. Rita, welcome, and it's a pleasure to have you. I'm pleased to see your technologies is working now. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can hear you okay. I've been listening, but my technology wouldn't allow me to be part of you. My video wasn't showing, but I've listened to the conversation, and I'm so grateful that we are almost talking the same thing about equality, about diversity, about all things that affect us as women from different spheres of life. I'm so happy because the women that I work with in prisons haven't been allowed to express themselves. Before I came in, they were treated as outcasts. Nobody wanted to listen to their stories. But when we founded Female Prisoner Support Trust, it has given us a lot of mileage to let women speak about their experiences, their experience before and after incarceration. I wouldn't want to labor you more. Let me listen to what others are saying, then I will be able to join in as the conversation flows, because already it was flowing.
Oh, fantastic, Rita. And for those who might not be aware of Rita, because I didn't get a chance to introduce, so Rita is a human rights defender whose objective is to ensure gender equality in all spheres of life. And she's a campaigner for women's rights and especially women and girls in prison. And Rita's joining us all the way from beautiful Zimbabwe. So welcome, Rita. I'm pleased you're able to join us for part of the conversation. And I think one of the questions that I actually, just leading on from what you're talking about there, Rita, is, you mentioned around in wider society as well, how women and marginalized genders face more kind of oppression. Can you tell us a little bit about, I suppose, with the work that you're doing and campaigning for women, how people can help to break down gender bias, especially for women and girls who are in incarceration?
It has been, I can say, stereotyped to say it's only men who are capable of committing crimes, but a woman is capable of committing a crime because it's a human being. So when we speak of human rights, these are the people that we are including. It's an inclusive approach into dealing with societal issues. So if we say that a woman is very bad because she has committed a crime, we'll be lying to ourselves. Women do commit crimes equally the same way men commit crimes. We have seen women committing crimes such as murder, that men, if it's stereotyped, it's men who are supposed to go to commit murder because of masculinity. Men are supposed to behave in such a way. But right now, we are looking at the nature of crimes, of which you find out that some of the crimes that women commit, like infanticide. Yesterday, I was speaking on a platform about infanticide. Men do not commit infanticide. it's women who commit infanticide, women committing abortion, and all these punishable offenses that attract a jail sentence. So when we speak of these issues in our communities, we try to do gender disaggregation, to say, it's men who do this and it's women who don't do this. But when we are looking at the society that we are living in, even the communities, even when we go further to look at places of detention, we find that in the places of detention around the world, we find there are more women than men who are in places of detention because of their geographical backgrounds. So women in prison and out of prison, they don't get the same treatment as men get, because when a man comes out of prison, he is celebrated to be a hero, especially those who commit fraud, who commit other crimes that are sinister, that are money related. They are treated with dignity, whereas a woman loses her dignity the minute she is arrested. From the arresting point up to serving her sentence, up to finishing her sentence, up to going into the community, she faces a lot of stigma and discrimination. These are the people that I work with, and also trying to give them hope that that's not the end of the world. What we do, we work on reintegration, rehabilitation, reconciliation, restoration of their dignity, and for them to reform as well. Because once you go through this prison system, you tend to lose because of the circumstances that you are going through. So this is the kind of work that I do. People always ask me, why did you choose to work with women? At one point, I'm a human rights defender. We did a demonstration at one point, and I was arrested with a few women. We went into prison, and I started thinking about the woman's life who is in prison, that I left in the prison. And I said, who helps this woman? Because nobody wants to talk about them. Even when we do International Women's Day, we don't even take International Women's Day to prison. So for bringing me in here, Cynthia, it's a very great opportunity for me, so that the world knows and understands that there's a community that is behind bars, and those who have come out of the prison walls, who really need our support so that they don't re-offend, because most of them live in the margins of life.
No, that's amazing, Rita. And thank you so much for sharing that insight, and really, really powerful. And I think it's, as you said, it's really, when we talk about women, it should be all women in all different kind of circumstances. And thank you for the incredible work that you do in giving those women a voice and championing them, and and uplifting them, and making sure that they're reintroduced in society in the right kind of way and in a positive kind of way. So thank you so much for that insight. And I know we could talk about this topic in more detail, but just conscious of time, and I'm wanting to make sure that we answer as many questions as we can, because I can see there's quite a lot of questions coming into the Q&A section that I'd love to make sure we have the chance to kind of ask and go through. So I think one of the questions that's in here was around, how do you break gender bias at leadership level? So I don't know who would love to pick that up, or would love to tackle that one. Because I know at leadership, it's sometimes one of the biggest kind of challenges, is how do you get the leaders kind of bought? And I think Toby alluded a little bit, but Joanne would love to kind of, you've got your hand up, just to see what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I can share with you some of the stuff that I've learned from my clients that are doing well in this area. I think what seems to work very well with my clients is that they're being very intentional with their succession planning.
Yeah.
it's surprising how many organizations don't have a succession plan in place. But when they do, they need to be really intentional about who is in the pipeline and how diverse that pipeline is, and what steps are being taken to make sure that over the next 5-10 years or so that you've got a diverse pipeline of people to call on for the senior leadership positions. So that's kind of one thing I've learned. And then what I said earlier was around sponsorship as well. Making sure that senior leaders on the board are being active sponsors. Again, I mean, that's part of the succession planning as well, that you're really advocating for people.
Fantastic. And anyone got anything else to add? Joanne, I can see your hand is up. Did you want to add a point there?
Yeah, for me, I think inclusive leadership is critical for the success of any initiative around D&I playbooks, around creating positive people experiences. Too often we promote people into leadership roles who are fantastic technicians, fantastic processors. We need to treat leadership as a standalone profession, give people the time, give people the training, give people the energy to become more effective leaders. And we should select our leaders with high EQ, high emotional intelligence, high compassion levels. Technical skills don't matter so much, but it's the people skills that we don't often look for when we're recruiting our leaders. I think that's the key point. And the other element is that what gets done or what gets measured gets done. That's the old adage. If we're not targeting with KPIs, with OKRs, with making sure that our leaders are motivating and empowering their staff through really good data science, people insights, where we can drill down, understand the lived experience and how people feel, the employee experience within teams, within departments. How can we give the leaders in the organization the insights for them to be able to manage their teams, motivate their teams, bring them on board? So I think it's really, really important that let's create measurements, create targets. Sorry, not targets. I hate the word target. Create expectations where inclusive leadership is critical to the roles. And Toby already mentioned the link for the Deloitte, the 6 traits. So start looking at that and actually building that into the leadership role expectations. And it may not be that everybody is a great leader, in which case we need to help them find a better role for themselves that doesn't lose their status. But we want to focus on creating great leaders, which will in turn empower, motivate, promote great staff and great culture and great ethos.
Fantastic, thank you, Joanne. And there's a question in here which kind of leads to something that I'm not sure if it was Arty or Lydia that was talking around aspects of intersectionality. And the question is, what do you think are some aspects of intersectionality that get forgotten about the most? I don't know, Arty, Lydia, Rita.
I'm happy to jump in with my. I think intersectionality is pretty complex. And I think the aspects that get forgotten depend on the situation and the person who's looking at it. So often the aspect that gets forgotten is the one that makes a person very uncomfortable, so they don't want to think about it. True. And it's based on their own bias or prejudice. And we all have some form of prejudice or bias. And the other is, it's often an aspect that's not represented in the conversation or in the room at that point of time. So we may be talking about certain things which are represented amongst the panelists here today. But something else that's not represented right now, we might not bring it up because it's not here and that person isn't speaking for themselves.
That's true.
I think those are the two aspects that get forgotten or sidelined very easily.
Yeah, perfect.
Can I just add to that? We often think about intersectionality, inclusion as revolving around protected characteristics, the obvious signs of diversity. We've got to also remember that people have different anxieties, different challenges for showing up, which may not be protected. They're not covered in the law. They're not in the manuals and the Equality Acts. So it's really understanding that people have more going on in their life, more than just their defined diversity characteristics. I think we often forget that we're thinking intersectionally. I mean, you may think I'm a very confident person, but I have anxiety about a number of things. Not quite debilitating, but certainly limiting my ability to function in some cases. So it's seeing into the heart of people and not assuming that, oh, you're confident, you're an extrovert, you're white, you've got your life together. And I think that's what often is missed, is actually understanding the challenges I have of being me and showing up today.
Yeah, no, you spot on that, Joanne. And I think there's actually a question here that alludes a little bit to that. And it's actually directed at you, Lydia. So it's a good thing you got your hand up, because it says,
hope I can answer.
It says, Lydia, as a psychotherapist, what biases have you experienced as you've developed in your career and especially within your field, and how did you overcome it?
Yes. I haven't spoken very openly about some of this before, but in my field, you know, I'm always complimented. You're amazing. You are amazing. You're the best. You're one of the best. But in terms of what happens when it comes down to where do we go, promotion, progress, it was always, you know, me personally taking a step back and say, okay, I'm amazing, but what's happening here? You know, why am I not able to kind of progress, move forward in this field? And for that, you know, I had self-doubts, right? You can get all 5s on your evaluation, but then you're wondering, okay, what's happening? Right. And again, I would also say I'm a woman, but I'm also a Black woman. So I think that also, I guess I don't want to say 2 strikes against me, because that's not how I live my life. It strikes against me. But I would say definitely, you know, for a period of time, it felt like, what's happening here? I'm just kind of spinning my wheels and I'm hearing how amazing I am. But in terms of the progress, better organizationally, I saw that taking much longer personally than it did for other people, whether men, white women, or Black, white women, white men, but just not me, you know, somebody who fits with, you know, I say my qualifications. That growth was not happening. It was happening internally, but in terms of organizational, it wasn't happening. So, I mean, I'm a very strong person, so I have the space on, and Joanne, you just said it, you know, this level of confidence, but there are times when I doubted, okay, am I good enough, right? Am I good enough for everybody to say I'm great, but, you know, you're not treating me as if I'm, you know, I'm contributing or I'm giving the best that I thought I was giving to any organization. So I mean, spirituality is important to me. My own therapy is important to me, self-reflection, meditation, and a lot of those different outlets that I've had to use to, you know, to build myself up and to, you know, stand and say, I know who I am, regardless of how I am treated by others around me.
Yeah, perfect. Brilliant. And I know I'm just conscious of time, and there's one burning question I want to ask all of you as a panelist. As this event is also all about celebration, and you know, we want to make sure that we leave our audience with something to kind of take away. What one big win that you've witnessed in the past year around gender equality would you impart or share for people to maybe replicate in their lives or take away with them? Or if there's anything that you've seen in the past year that you've thought, wow, this is a great achievement for gender equality. So whether that's around the gender pay gap, whether we're getting closer to that, and how that can be replicated in organizations, anything that you'd love to impart, one thing you'd love to impart on the audience to take away around how they can break the bias when it comes to gender equality. Rita, I can see your hand is up. Oh, I'm not sure if you're on mute.
Yes, thank you, Cynthia, for that question. I think my best of all times was being awarded the International Women of Courage in 2020 as a human rights defender. You know, the kind of work that we do, especially when you're fighting for rights, be it civil and political rights, you get a lot of pushback, you get a lot of challenges as a woman, and age as well plays a big part, consistency as well. For how long have you been doing this work? what did you gain after that? What recognition did you get? So in 2020, I got this award being offered by the US Embassy State Department. I traveled to America to get that award. Yes, I got it. I thought I was going to stop working, but we continue doing this work because you have the vision and you want others, you want more people to join you as you journey along. Thank you.
And congratulations on your award, Rita, and continue the incredible work that you're doing. And, you know, I'm so pleased that you've received that recognition, and hopefully that will spearhead that incredible work to continue. Anybody else got anything they would love to share, or anything that we can impart to the audience?
Yeah, something that inspired me this week was reading an article that talked about how Marie Claire magazine and Elle magazine in Ukraine had completely changed the editorial line. So they're now moving away from fashion in peacetime to talk about practical solutions for women in wartime. How can you fire a gun with acrylic nails? How can you give birth under fire in an underground shelter? How can you support women and girls with period and sanitary products in a time of war? So I found that very inspirational. Those two influential magazines in a war zone took their responsibility for empowering women and making sure they channeled their message to be relevant to the struggles that women were facing in Ukraine right now. And that really inspired me that we are starting to think out of our boxes. We are starting to not just pay lip service to this, and that we are, as women, coming together to try and bring that change. And I'd like to think that, you know, IWD 2023 will have increased that notch one more level. Yes, we may not be there yet. Yes, we may take us years, but it's that continual desire to see change happen. And I think that's what I'm seeing at the moment.
Yeah, no, and it's inspiring to see, especially as you say, within a war zone, that those really practical things are happening, and especially the two magazines that you'd never expect to be leading with that kind of narrative, you know, just setting the example there. Thank you for sharing that, Joanne. And Arty, I can see your hand is up.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Cynthia. I'd just like to talk about a change in policy that we achieved, and the results of that are coming through now. We changed the admissions policy for girls applying for engineering and IT degrees to university. And we decided to give them a few extra points towards their application. And that led to a huge backlash. And it led to newspaper articles saying we were giving a free handout and free lunch would crash because female engineers who'd had a free lunch were designing them, and so on and so forth. And on any of the data that we'd used to make the decision. They didn't look at any of the reasoning behind it, and they didn't look at any of the past results of such schemes. So it took a lot of courage for us to stand through the backlash and continue to push the change. But it did lead to a 10% increase, which was the target, of females applying for engineering and IT degrees. And if you want to break the bias, sometimes we have to withstand backlash. We have to withstand people getting annoyed or unhappy with change. Because change is not easy. And small individual changes are one thing, but systemic changes are tough, harder. So if you want to change the system or even break the system, you have to stand tall, and you have to really dig your heels in and stand with a group of people to make that happen. And I think that is part of the problem and part of the solution as well, to get together and to do this.
Yeah, no, I like that breaking the system, and collectively as well, you know, bringing others along, I think is fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Arty. And Lydia, I'll come over to you for your insights as well.
I guess when it comes down to wins, I would just make mine very personal. You know, for me, taking the step to start in my own private practice, as I shared earlier, the doubts of how I fit into a world diverse in terms of race, culture, and all of that. How do I fit into building a business with what appeared to be, you know, a lot of negative factors coming towards me? That took a lot of courage. And the other piece about it, I would say my invitation to participate today is a win for me. And I'm just so grateful to have met, all of you amazing people. So that is a big win for me personally.
Oh, fantastic. And last but not least, Toby, we'll hand over the last comment from you.
Yeah, there's a couple of points. I think I've noticed a lot of organizations understanding, or employers understanding their role in trying to reduce inequality in society, and how they can do that through employment. So a lot of employers have really paid attention, on the back of George Floyd's murder and the Black Lives Matter movement, and Sarah Everard's murder, and safer streets and things like that. So I think employers are really, I'm noticing, increasingly taking it more serious. And then on a kind of more on a personal note, I'm noticing it's like when I talk to organizations where it's the chief executive who is leading on this, saying, as an organization, I want to make a stand on gender equality and reducing inequalities in society. And this is something that I'm not going to delegate to the HR department. This is something as the chief executive that I'm going to take an active lead on. And I'm going to use my voice, my power and my privilege to talk about this on linked platforms like LinkedIn, Glassdoor, that kind of thing. So yeah, 2 points. One, organizations understanding their impact on society and taking that responsibility seriously, and chief executives leading on this and not delegating it.
Oh, fantastic. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I wanted to give a massive thank you to all the panelists today, starting with Lydia all the way from the US, Arty all the way from India, Rita all the way from Zimbabwe, Joanne and Toby all the way from the UK. Massive thank you all for sharing your insights. And I think for me, as much as this has been a celebration, it's also been an education for all of us. And I think we've learned a lot today. There's things that we can all take away and go implement in our everyday lives. Some of the notes I took here is how can we re-educate people? How can we become more aware of our biases? How can we evolve people as allies? Let's tackle systemic barriers and start dismantling some of those barriers that exist in organization. Intersectionality was key in everything that we talked about today. All the different layers of individuals, shown out very, very strongly. But again, just the part that all of us can play around breaking the gender. If we want to see the change, we all have to be part of that change. And I think this has really been so insightful, but more than anything, so inspiring and powerful for all of us to take it upon ourselves to go out to the world, break the bias, be that change. So thank you all so much for joining us today. And I hope our audience found that very useful. And please do follow all our wonderful panelists. I think some of the contact details are on there. But as you've seen, they're all amazing individuals who were so inspiring and, have taught us all a lot today. So just a massive thank you from all of us, and happy International Women's Day. And thank you all. Have a wonderful night. Take care.